Sorry. Hey guys. Hey Deb. Hey, Great Dane. So it was a snow day today for Leland. He didn't have to go to school. The buses were canceled. Hey Mama 3. Hey Cool Gamer. Okay, so this live is just gonna be about the AIDS pandemic in the 80s and 90s. I don't know. When I was growing up, I was always told that AIDS started in Africa because a black man did some unspeakable thing to a monkey. That's what I was always told, and that's all I ever heard was that. So growing up, that's what I always thought. And then now, like I didn't even know how it started because then it was with gay men, right? So I don't necessarily know exactly what it was or how it happened or whatever. I just assumed it was a virus that just happened. You know what I mean? Well, growing up, I'm sure all of us, that's what we heard was, yeah, what I just said. Well, I ended up watching a series that I absolutely love. It's called American Horror Story. And I was watching season 11 and wow, it's very powerful. It was about the AIDS epidemic. It was also about the serial killer, the last call killer, who was actually killing gay men. It was very powerful. So I researched it, I looked it up, and everything that was on there was true. It broke my heart watching that season. I actually cried quite a few times, especially the last episode. It was really hard to watch. Now that I know what actually happened, and I know, well, I've definitely learned more, and I know more than I did when I was younger. Um, I feel like shit. I mean, I didn't know. I didn't know. That's the thing. That's the problem. People don't know. So I figured we'd cover that. Just kind of, sorry, I apologize for the background noise. That's my washer. So I just figured we'd cover that and just kind of, it's important. You know what I mean? It's important. It really was important. Absolutely. And the way that, because they were gay men, they were treated so wrongly, so poorly. If any of you are into American Horror Story, that last season, it's really friggin' sad. Really sad. So I thought I'd start off with, I've got a video here from Inside Edition, and then I also have what they said, their article on the web. So it's just going to read through a couple of those. And then there's the actual HIV AIDS timeline and stuff like that. There was protests and everything. Like I didn't know. And that's what I feel bad about. I didn't know. Now that I do know, I'm going to share with you guys. Just going to share my screen. So I'm going to go through the HIV and the AIDS first. Then again, like I wasn't born until 1984, so I really wouldn't know about this. But growing up, I should have never heard the stories that I heard. They were disgusting, very disgusting. So this was, I found this on the history website. And right off the bat, it says silence equals death. So in the late 70s and the early 80s, a virus that had previously appeared sporadically around the world began to spread throughout the United States. Originally identified as a gay disease because gay men were one of the primary groups afflicted. HIV and the syndrome it causes, acquired immune deficiency syndrome, were unknown in 1981, but had become household terms and the number one threat to public health by the late 1980s. You see what I just read here? And they even just said it originally identified as the gay disease. That's what I grew up thinking it was. For several years, after the Center of Disease for Control first realized that the illness cropping up in communities around the country were all the work of the same virus, the American government did little, absolutely little, to address the epidemic, a failure to act that many attribute to the fact that HIV and AIDS was primarily affecting gay men, intravenous drug users, immigrants, and racial minorities. So, usually when you get HIV, all the cases I've ever heard of was, yes, through sharing needles if you're a drug user. And gay men, they also have down here immigrants and racial minorities. So, HIV and AIDS activists, medical professionals, artists, and a number of people with AIDS who went public with their diagnosis despite the stigma surrounding the disease eventually spurred a massive response from the US government and the international health community. By the mid 1990s, HIV and AIDS numbers were on the decline in America. And today, there are a variety of effective treatments for AIDS and HIV that have made the diagnosis significantly less dire than it was when the epidemic began. But there's still no cure. See, you hear that, guys? There's absolutely no cure. That's scary. I even thought that you could control it and everything else, at least nowadays, now that we're in the 2000, like we're in 2023, right? But it does say there's effective treatments, yes, but there is no cure. Despite the significant progress, the global AIDS epidemic is far from over. 1.7 million people around the world were infected with HIV in 2019. Holy crap. Bringing the total number of people living with AIDS today to 38 million. Wow, wow. 38 million people? Hey, Teresa. You knew straight people who had HIV and AIDS. Exactly, Teresa. That is insane. 38 million people who have it. So, origins and the silent spread. Early 20th century. At some point in the first few decades of the 20th century, simian immune deficiency virus makes the jump. Oh my God, they are mentioning the monkeys. Okay, so it makes the jump from chimpanzees to humans in Central Africa. Now known as a subtype HIV-1, the virus began circulating in Leopoldville, now Kinshasa, in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, believed to be the first zoonotic transmission of HIV. Okay, so some of this monkey stuff is true and the gay men is true. Not, I don't know. So 1959, a man dies in the Congo. Tests of his blood samples later established this is the earliest confirmed HIV-related death. In 1959, in 1960s, HIV-2 is believed to have jumped to humans from monkeys in West Africa. Like Guinea-Bissau around this time, studies later reveal that HIV-1 arrived in the Americas during the late 1960s. A significant number of Haitians were working in the Congo at the time, with some likely bringing the virus back to the Caribbean on their return. December 12, 1977. Greth Rask, a Danish physician and surgeon who spent years working in the Congo, dies of pneumonia. Over several years, she suffered from a number of opportunistic infections and severe immune deficiency. 10 years after her death, the blood test finds she was infected with HIV. Wow. A gay men's crisis. So in 1980, April 24th, the CDC receives a report on Ken Horn, a gay man living in San Francisco who was suffering from Kaposi's sarcoma, a rare and unusually aggressive cancer linked with weakened immunity. Horn dies on November 30th, 1981. The same year, the CDC retroactively identifies Horn as the first American patient of the AIDS epidemic. So this was in 1981. May 18th, in 1981, Lawrence Mass, a gay doctor in New York City, writes an article for the New York Native, an LGBT newspaper titled Disease Rumors Largely Unfounded. Although the headline would soon be proven false, his report that a number of gay men have been admitted to New York City intensive care units with severely compromised immune systems is the first article to mention what soon becomes known as AIDS. Okay, so it started in 1981, it looks like, in New York. 1980. June 15th, 1981. Just read that, did I not? Yes, I did. The CDC publishes an article describing 5 cases of a rare lung infection in young, otherwise healthy gay men in Los Angeles, 2 of whom have died and 3 of whom died a short time after. The same day, New York dermatologist Dr. Alvin Freeman Kine reports a cluster of instances of Kaposi sarcoma in gay men in New York and California. Several major outlets report on the article, and the CDC begins to receive a steady trickle of reports of similar cases. This article is often cited as the official beginning of the AIDS crisis. July 1981. An LGBT newspaper in San Francisco, the Bay Area Reporter, writes about gay men's pneumonia and urges gay men experiencing shortness of breath to see a doctor. The New York Times article, Rare Cancer Seen in 41 Homosexuals, leads to the coining of the term gay cancer to describe Kaposi sarcoma. There's no such thing as a gay cancer. Like, come on. On August 11th, 1981, writer and film producer Larry Kramer hosts a fundraiser in his New York City apartment, at which Dr. Freeman Kine addresses a crowd of gay men. He raises $6,635 to fund research into the mysterious new illness, the only money raised for the cause in 1981. Kramer soon co-founds the Gay Men's Health Crisis, a community-based nonprofit dedicated to serving the community throughout the emergency crisis. 1982. So this is Larry Kramer right here. He's a playwright. Seen here in 1993 was one of the generation's most viable AIDS activists. Kramer co-founded the Gay Men's Health Crisis in 1982 and was an early member of the ACT UP coalition. May 11th. In an article titled New Homosexual Disorder Worries Health Officials. What? New homosexual disorder worries health officials. Wow. See how people, when they don't know something, they chalk it up to something completely different? Hey, Rhodey. I remember hearing that AIDS came from Haiti. Yeah, me too. Africa for me. I know, Deb. It's just reading it now pisses me off because, ugh, that's exactly it. They're ignorant. Hey, Navajo Blondie. But yeah, like I'm sure people from that actually were born in the 80s or even younger, or even a little bit older, that's all they heard was, well, AIDS was started from Africa because a man did it with a monkey and brought it to the States where gay men got it. Like that's all I've ever heard. It's disgusting. Just the shit people say. I get it. Yeah, they're ignorant of what was going on, but still. So, May 11th, in an article titled New Homosexual Disorder Worries Health Officials, the New York Times first publishes the phrase gay related immune deficiency, or GRID, contributing to the widespread misconception that AIDS only affects gay men. September 24th, the CDC uses the term AIDS for the first time. It defines acquired immune deficiency syndrome as a disease at least moderately predictive of a defect in cell-mediated immunity occurring in a person with no known cause for diminished resistance to that disease. 1983, January 1st. Ward 86, the world's first dedicated outpatient clinic for people with AIDS, opens at San Francisco General Hospital. The clinic develops a San Francisco model of care, a holistic approach that focuses not only on medical care, but also on making patients comfortable, providing them with resources, they need to deal with the many challenges of living with AIDS and allowing patients facing severe social stigma to live and, in many cases, die with dignity. The compassionate model is adopted by medical professionals around the world and sets a standard for excellence in treating HIV and AIDS patients. I know it's just a show, but the American Horror Story, like I said, when I was watching, especially the last episode, the reporter's husband, he got it and he was in the hospital bed and they were supposed to be helping them die with dignity. And in actuality, what was happening is they were letting these affected gay men in these hospitals to die on their own. There was no help. There was nobody helping them. They didn't have water every day. Their intravenous's would run dry. It just wow. January 7th, the CDC reports the first cases of AIDS in women. March 4th, the CDC publishes an article saying that AIDS is most prevalent among gay men with multiple sexual partners, people who inject drugs, patients, and people with hemophilia. It suggests that sexual contact and exposure to blood and blood products are the most likely vectors for the disease. May 20th, Dr. Francois and her colleagues at Francis Pasteur Institute report the discovery of a retrovirus believed to be the cause of AIDS. She and a colleague eventually received the Nobel Prize for their work. May 25th, the New York Times publishes its first front page article on AIDS. June 12th, at the National AIDS Forum in Denver, 11 gay men with AIDS take over the stage. They issue a statement laying out what becomes known as the Denver Principles, asserting the rights of people with AIDS to be protected from discrimination, to have their voices heard by organizations making decisions about AIDS research and treatment, and to respect and dignity. And to and to respect and dignity. They also demand that the phrase AIDS victims be replaced by people with AIDS. Okay. September 9th, the CDC rules out the possibility of transmission by casual contact, meaning air, water, food, or environmental services, but misconceptions about the way AIDS can be spread lingers for years. November 22nd, the World Health Organization convenes its first meeting on AIDS and begins formal surveillance of the illness. Awareness spreads, misconceptions linger. 1984. Now that was the year I was born, and that's my birthday, March 1st. It's kind of neat. March 1st, a study in the American Journal of Medicine examines a cluster of 40 patients with KS and other opportunistic illnesses, tracing their sexual contacts. It describes an unidentified flight attendant, patient O, the O standing for outside Southern California, where the study was focused, who was known to have hundreds of sexual partners a year. The report states this man had sexual contact with 8 of the men in the study and was the first patient in the study to show the onset of HIV and AIDS symptoms. Misconceptions around the study and a misreading of patient O give rise to the myth of patient zero, a promiscuous or even malicious gay man who single-handedly and knowingly touched off the AIDS pandemic in the United States. April 23rd, the Department of Health and Human Services announces the discovery of a retrovirus they call HTLV-3, the cause of AIDS. They also announced the development of a blood test and raise hopes that a vaccine could be developed in the next 2 years. July 13th, the CDC recommends avoiding injection drug use and reducing needle sharing as ways of preventing transmission. 1985, March 2nd, the U.S. Food and Drug Administrative licenses the first blood test for HIV, and blood banks begin screening the country's blood supply. Oh my, they didn't do that before? Oh my gosh. April 22nd, The Normal Heart, an audio biographical play about the early days of the crisis by Larry Kramer, opens off Broadway. So that would be this gentleman right here. Him. It's crazy because he looks like the actor in American Horror Story, just like him. July 25th, Rock Hudson, a legendary actor from the golden age of Hollywood whose homosexuality was an open secret in the industry, announces he has AIDS. Media coverage of AIDS increases dramatically in the following months. August 27th, Ryan White, a teenager who contracted AIDS through donated blood. Oh my God. Is barred from attending his middle school in Russiaville, Indiana, due to his condition. The ensuing legal battle makes White a national figure, highlighting the stigma of the disease and the misconceptions surrounding how it is spread and who can contract it. If they knew you can get it from needles, why the hell are they donating blood and not checking it? September 17th, President Ronald Reagan mentioned AIDS publicly for the first time. He calls it a top priority and rebuffs accusations that his administration has not taken it seriously. October 2nd, Rock Hudson dies of an AIDS related illness. He bequeaths $250,000 to create the American Foundation for AIDS Research. I didn't know that he died from AIDS. How AIDS remained an unspoken but deadly epidemic. So in 1986, there was a public health crisis. January 16th, the CDC reports that 1985 saw an 89% increase in AIDS diagnoses from 1984 and predicts that the number will double in 1986. May 1st, the International Committee on the Taxonomy of Viruses officially gives the name Human Immune Deficiency Virus, or HIV, to the virus that causes AIDS. July 18th, a group of minority community leaders meet with Surgeon General C. Everett Koop to voice concerns about HIV and AIDS in communities of color, unofficially founding the National Minority AIDS Council. November. In the Life, a Black Gay Anthology, the first collection of writings about the AIDS crisis from 29 Black gay authors, is published. The book received little mainstream attention at publication, but goes down in history as a watershed moment in gay literature. This is a quilt. The AIDS Memorial Quilt featured the name of 1,920 people who died of AIDS-related illnesses when it was first displayed in 1987. The number eventually grew to over 10,000 people. Wow. Remember the beginning of COVID and everyone hating China because some yeah, exactly. Yep. Yeah, I totally agree. February. Cleve Jones creates the first panel of the AIDS Memorial Quilt in honor of his friend Marvin Fieldman, who died of an AIDS-related illness in the previous October. Jones makes the panel 3 feet by 6 feet, the standard size of a grave plot, intending it and subsequent panels to serve as a way of remembering, grieving, and celebrating the lives of people who have died from AIDS in a society where many families refuse to acknowledge their cause of death, and some funeral homes and cemeteries refuse to handle their remains. The project becomes the Names Project. I get it. People are scared. I mean, wow. February 4th, the legendary pianist Liberace dies of an AIDS-related illness. His doctor claims that Liberace, who had long denied rumors that he was gay, died of a heart attack. A week later, the actual cause of his death is revealed. March 12th, Kramer helps found the AIDS Coalition to Unleash Power, or ACT UP, a direct action group that pressures officials, governments, pharmaceutical companies, and other institutions to protect those at risk of HIV and those who have contracted it. The organization's motto is Silence equals death. ACT UP begins agitating for increased access to experimental medications, as well as a coordinated national AIDS response. March 19th. The FDA approves AZT, the first medication for treatment of AIDS. Treatment does not cure HIV/AIDS, but can be used to slow its progress and prevent transmission in some instances, such as during birth. The FDA also adjusts regulations to expand access to experimental medications. March 31st. President Reagan and Prime Minister Jacques Chirac of France agree their countries will share credit for the discovery of HIV. Does it really matter? People are dying. Who cares? You don't need credit. Like, really? May 15th, the Public Health Service adds HIV to its immigration exclusion list. For the next 23 years, visa applicants are required to take a blood test and may be denied entry to the US if they test positive. May 31st, Reagan gives his first speech about AIDS. On June 24th, he creates the first presidential commission on AIDS. August 5th, a federal judge rules that a Florida school board cannot ban three HIV positive brothers, Ricky, Robert, and Randy Ray, from attending school. The community of Arcadia, Florida responds with death threats, bomb threats, and school boycott. The FDA, this August 18th, the FDA greenlights the first human test of a candidate vaccine against HIV. August 28th, after weeks of threats following a ruling that they could not be banned from school for being HIV positive, the home of brothers Ricky, Robert, and Randy Ray is, oh my God, is burned to the ground while the family is staying elsewhere. The Rays later announced that they will leave Arcadia. October 1st, the first National AIDS Awareness Month begins with the CDC launching a massive public education campaign that warns everyone is at a risk. October 11th, the Names Project displays its AIDS memorial quilt on the National Mall in Washington, D.C. for the first time. The quilt bears the names of 1,900 people who died of AIDS-related illnesses when it was first displayed. The number eventually grows to over 10,000 people, making the quilt the largest piece of community folk art in the world. November, the San Francisco Chronicle journalist Randy Schultz publishes and the band played on a book about the early years of the AIDS crisis. Schultz traces the story of AIDS from the death of Griff Rass to the death of Rock Hudson, arguing that the epidemic was allowed to happen thanks to incompetence, apathy, and discrimination against the populations it affected the most. His framing also leads to French Canadian flight attendant Gaetan Dugas being identified as patient zero. May 26th, the Surgeon General releases the nation's first coordinated HIV/AIDS education strategy, mailing out 107 million copies of a pamphlet titled Understanding AIDS in an attempt to reach every household in America, the largest public mailing in history. November 4th, President Reagan signs the first comprehensive federal AIDS bill, the Health Omnibus Programs Extension HOPE Act, establishing the Office of AIDS Research and authorizing federal funds for AIDS prevention, researching, and testing. December 1st, The Who declares the first World AIDS Day. 1990, February 16th, Keith Haring, a pop artist whose graffiti-inspired works often promoted AIDS-related charities and other social causes. He dies of an AIDS-related illness. I'm not sure who Keith Haring is. Does anybody know? April 8th, Ryan White dies of an AIDS-related illness. June 6th, the International AIDS Conference convenes in San Francisco, but a number of organizations boycott and protest of American immigration restrictions. July 26th, President Bush signs the Ryan White Comprehensive AIDS Resource Emergency Act, allocating over $220 million in federal funds for care and treatment of people with AIDS in its first year. The bill is a result of a bargain in exchange for insinuating payer of last resort programs to cover treatment for poor and uninsured people with HIV and AIDS. Conservatives won the inclusion of clauses stipulating that certain funds will only be available to states that have passed harsh criminal laws against knowingly transmitting HIV. It's crazy. I didn't know any of this stuff. What is that? Oh, the White House prepares for World AIDS Day 2011. Since 1991, the red ribbon has been used to represent AIDS awareness. Hey, SD. Hey, Kimmy. It's not a death sentence anymore. Yeah. May. The Visual AIDS Artists Caucus launches the Red Ribbon Project, creating small red ribbons for people to wear to raise awareness and fight against the stigma of HIV and AIDS. The ribbons receive widespread attention the following month when they are worn by a number of attendees and presenters at the 45th Tony Awards. November 7th. Ooh, Magic Johnson, a future Hall of Fame basketball player and one of the most famous athletes in the country, announces that he has tested positive for HIV and will retire immediately. Wow, I didn't know that. He does not elaborate on how he contracted the virus, but later acknowledges that he had unprotected sex with many women over the course of his career. The news reverberates around the country, and while rumors spread that Johnson is gay, for many his diagnosis confirms that straight people also face the risk of contracting HIV and AIDS. Okay, this one I knew. November 24th, legendary Queen frontman Freddie Mercury dies of an AIDS-related illness. One day after announcing that he has AIDS, a gay icon and the first rock star known to have died of HIV and AIDS, his death sets of outpourings of grief around the world, as many in the AIDS activist community expressed their gratitude that he made his diagnosis public. Yeah, because he also came out that he was gay as well, so that was pretty great at the time. 1992, AIDS becomes the leading cause of death for American men aged 25 to 44. April 8th, tennis star Arthur Ashe, the only black man to win single titles at Wimbledon, the US Open, and the Australian Open, announces that he is HIV positive. He believes he contracted the virus via a blood transfusion he received during heart surgery. April 20th, the Freddie Mercury tribute concert for AIDS awareness draws a crowd of 72,000 people to London's Wembley Stadium. December 13th, 15-year-old Ricky, the oldest of the Ray brothers, dies of an AIDS-related illness. 1993. February 3rd, Rudolph, a Soviet ballet dancer whose 1961 defection and subsequent performances with London's Royal Ballet made him an international sensation. He dies in Paris of an AIDS-related illness. February 6th, Arthur Ashe dies of an AIDS. Okay. June, President Bill Clinton establishes the Office of National AIDS Policy to coordinate federal efforts to combat HIV and AIDS. December 14th, Philadelphia, a major motion picture starring Tom Hanks as a gay man with AIDS and Denzel Washington as his lawyer in an anti-discrimination lawsuit, debuts to rave reviews. One of the first mainstream films to deal with homophobia and HIV and AIDS is a box office hit, and Hanks wins Best Actor at the 66th Academy Awards. He deserved it. That movie, it was hard to watch, but I'm glad they made it. I really am. You guys seen Philadelphia? Hey, Heavenly Cow. I know that's really yeah, that's why I'm reading all this now, Deb. I'm just trying to figure out who, what, where, why, when, how. It was required in one of your dental school. Really? February 17th, journalist Randy Schultz dies of an AIDS-related illness. And that was the reporter. June, the FDA approves the first protease inhibitor, ushering in the era of highly active antiviral therapy, which is HAART. Over the next few years, aggressive treatments like this become the new standard in HIV care. September 22nd, the National Academy of Sciences concludes that syringe exchange programs are effective in preventing the spread of HIV and AIDS. November, the number of total AIDS cases reported in the United States passes, holy crap, 500,000 people. November 11th, Pedro Zamora dies of an AIDS-related illness. The 22-year-old broke many barriers as a contestant on MTV's The Real World. Oh my God, I remember when that show first came out. I loved it. In which he discussed living with AIDS with his housemates, dispelled many misconceptions, and began a relationship with another contestant with whom he shared the first same-sex commitment ceremony to be aired on American television. 1995, February 23rd, Greg Louganis, who swept diving events at the 1984 and 1988 Olympics and is considered by many the greatest American diver ever, announces that he is HIV positive. First diagnosed 6 months before the 1988 Games, Louganis had kept his diagnosis and treatment a secret, even after coming out as gay in 1994. 1996, the number of AIDS cases diagnosed usually in the US declines for the first time since the pandemic began. AIDS ceases to be the leading cause of death for all Americans aged 25 to 44, although it remains the leading cause of death among African Americans aged 25 to 44. 1997, November 21st, the Food and Drug Administration Modernization Act institutes an accelerated drug approval process, enshrining in law a demand frequently made by activists. 1998, President Clinton declares HIV and AIDS a severe and ongoing health crisis in African American and Hispanic communities, after community leaders develop a call to action to address the dramatically disproportionate amount of cases in their communities. Congress soon allocates $156 million for the Minority Aid Initiative. 1999, despite declining numbers in the United States, the WHO announces that AIDS has become the fourth leading cause of death worldwide and the number one killer in Africa. Holy. Okay, so we only got up to 1999. Wow. Right? I remember when the real world first came out. It was like for us younger people, it was amazing because we never seen, well, like real live television like that. It was amazing. That was a huge show. Yeah, I vaguely remember that too, SD. It was a big deal, yeah, when he was on the show. Yeah. I don't know, SD. I'm glad now at least there's, well, I'm not sure if there's necessarily a vaccination, but there's help, you know. I know, Brittany, that's what I brought up in the beginning, season 11. Oh, I'm gonna see if I can show you guys at least part of it. Okay, let's see. So this, I'm not gonna, yeah, I'm not gonna spoil it for you guys, but this is probably the most, this is probably the toughest bit because I fell in love with these two guys. Let's go share it. So this one's titled Patrick's Death Scene. Not only was he openly gay, he was very open with his diagnosis and how it affected him. I think he helped break the stigma down a little bit. Yeah, I believe so. You're right with that. I actually absolutely believe that. When seeing patients, I was always more concerned about catching hepatitis B because my vaccine series didn't take. HIV is a lot harder to be infected with. Is it? So is it easier to get like hepatitis? I've had all my shots for that. Um, but HIV and AIDS, I would think it's definitely different now. Yeah. Okay, so this is the death scene. Now, these 2 people are in love. They're gay, they're in love, and one is a reporter, and the one in the bed is a cop. And he wasn't able to come out as gay because, well, back then, it was like blasphemy. You don't talk about it, you don't let anybody know that you are, and you just don't come out, especially a cop, because they beat people up who are gay. Yeah. So this last part, oh, okay, I'm gonna quit.
Hmm? I'm glad. I wouldn't want to be anywhere else.
Yeah, I don't hear anything. That's weird. That might be why. My apologies. I'll fix that.
Hmm? I'm glad. I wouldn't want to be anywhere else. Sorry. No. No, no, no. You don't have anything to be sorry about. It's a sickness, baby. It's okay. I got you. Okay, I got you. It's okay. I'm here. I'm here. I got you. I've got you.
A desert road from Vegas to nowhere, someplace better than where you've been. A coffee machine that needs some fixing in a little cafe just around the bend. I am calling you. I am calling. A hot, dry wind blows right through me. The baby's crying and I can't sleep. But we both know a change is coming. Coming closer, sweet release. I'm calling.
Just so sad.
I know you hear me. I know you hear me.
In the 1880s, it was bad there. No, to help the patients out in the medicines. No, there wasn't. I'm surprised to see though that both presidents, Bush and Reagan at the time, gave out. Well, not like it came from their pocket, but they had it so that there was millions of dollars invested into AIDS, like the research, where it started, where it came from, who brought it, who did not. During that time, not only was there, the AIDS, HIV and AIDS pandemic, there was also a serial killer going around and killing these men, these gay men. And they titled it Bag Murders and the Last Call Killer. So not only did they have fear of HIV and AIDS, they had to worry about this goddamn serial killer. Huh? So this here I was looking at, and it says how the bag murders and the last call killer put in focus the dangers the New York LGBTQ plus community faces. And this was in the 80s as well. So the killings of gay men, last seen in New York, included Variety reporter Addison Barrell and 6 others in the 1970s and 4 in the 1990s. Serve as reminders of the dangers in the LGBTQ plus community have faced while simultaneously fighting for equality. It's just crazy. In the late 1970s, one man was arrested in his downtown Manhattan apartment for crimes that shocked the LGBTQ plus community. Then in the early 1990s, as the HIV/AIDS crisis was raging on, another killer was striking fear among gay men in New York. That predator's reign of terror that went on for nearly a decade. I don't know, I just couldn't imagine. Not only do you have to worry about it, you know, a serial killer as well, and the serial killers are killing AIDS victims. I mean, wow. These crimes wreaked havoc among New York's LGBT plus community, but were hardly recognized as the dire crime sprees they were by the public, the media, and some say even investigators and leaders within the city. And that's because they were gay. People just didn't care enough, you know? It was like a blasphemy or something, which is awful. These crimes wreaked havoc among New York's. Okay, I just read that, didn't I? So they were hardly recognized as the dire crime springs they were by the public, the media, and some say even investigators and leaders within the city. Even back then, like even police would kick the crap out of gay men. Yeah, it was like taboo. So the 1970s, the killing of a film reporter and the bag murders. Building on what began during the Stonewall riots in June 1969, the LGBTQ plus community in New York in the 70s continued to fight for equal rights and the ability to live without issue. I'm just going to check this. The 1970s was a sexual revolution for everybody, particularly gay men. Columnist Michael Musto told Inside Edition Digital. This was after the 1969 Stonewall Rebellion, which defined the modern gay movement, and it led to a lot more freedom and visibility. And it was before AIDS reared its ugly head in the early 80s. So sex was everywhere. For gay men, it was not only in bars, there was sex in trucks, there was sex on the pier, sex was in the air, and people were certainly taking advantage of it. The level of comfort gay people in New York had with being open about their sexuality was entirely subjective. Havens across the city in the forms of bars, nightclubs, and cafes that were founded by and for the LGBTQ plus afforded a comfort to some gay New Yorkers, but violent homophobia was still rampant in New York City. Yeah, so that part there, I remember reading about that as well. They actually had gay bars for gay men. And yet, New York City was a murderous place for gay men, not only with the serial killer, but with, you know, them being killed because they are gay just from people walking down the street, gangs of people, homophobic people. Like it, wow, it's so hard to even put that into perspective. At the time, gay men walking near gay bars or underground clubs in areas like Chelsea or meatpacking were often the targets of teenagers, some of whom wouldn't hesitate to assault those they thought were part of the LGBTQ plus community. New York State's first openly gay senator Tom Duane told Inside Edition Digital, "If you walked down certain streets, you were in danger," he said. Many people would be probably drunk and still drinking, which made them even easier to cause harm to. And it's just scary to even think about that now. And then between 1977 and 1979, the remains of 6 dismembered men who cops said they believed were gay turned up in the Hudson River in bags that reportedly displayed the insignia of NYU Medical Center's neuropsychiatric unit. The gruesome discovery left the community on edge. The crimes became known as the bag murders and the CUPPI murders, a technical term meaning circumstances unknown pending police investigation. But the murders were hardly reported by mainstream news outlets. Instead, it was reporter Arthur Bell at the alternative paper, The Village Voice, who helped bring attention to the atrocities, according to Esquire. Every year, there were approximately 4 sexually oriented murders of gay men in the Greenwich Village area. Bell wrote in 1977, "Seldom do the papers report the crimes." That is just sad and disgusting. And it was Bell who noticed, so this reporter noticed something sinister in the September 1977 murder of Variety film reporter Addison Barrow, who was found stabbed and beaten to death in his Greenwich Village apartment. At first, police thought it was a robbery gone wrong as the apartment looked to be trashed, but it was Bell who pointed out in the Village Voice article there's nothing gay about murder, that nothing was taken. Bell wrote that detectives and the suspect was looking for cash, but to Bell that didn't sit right. It was not a break-in crime. Beryl had brought his assailant home or allowed him into the apartment, Bell wrote. Beryl frequented the after-hours and underground gay clubs in Chelsea and the meatpacking districts, including Roadhouse, Ties, the Anvil, and Mine Shaft. The clubs didn't have signs and were not known to those outside of the BDSM. I would never want to go anywhere, ever. Like, just to even go pick up a loaf of bread is terrifying in New York at this time. Mine shaft was part of a subculture, Dwayne said. It wasn't like, oh, what do you do this weekend? He wouldn't have said to his coworker, I went to the mine shaft. That's not really something you'd be discussing. Bell wrote for Vero. It wasn't the fetish itself that was the draw, but instead being part of the in crowd. So this is Arthur Bell. He's the reporter that was in the show. And from what I know of, he actually also contracted AIDS and he died as well. And his partner. Police believed Farrell either picked someone up at the mine shaft where he was supposedly last seen, or on his way home and maintained he was robbed by that person, according to the Village Voice. But Bell used his power as a member of the media to get the killer's attention. Much like Jemmy Breslin, who used his column at the New York Daily News to write to New York City serial killer Son of Sam, Bell did something similar in his story. There's nothing gay about murder. Arthur Bell was my predecessor at the Village Voice. I'm actually the person who replaced him after he passed. Arthur was a terrific gay activist, columnist must have said. He wrote about showbiz, but he also wrote about more serious things, like these murders, and it was a great move on the part of Arthur Bell to put in his column, a plea for anyone who either did the murder or knew about it to reach out. And it actually did help lead to solving the crime. That's amazing. Just over a week after Bell's story was published, the journalist received an anonymous call from a man claiming he killed a Variety reporter. Bell talked to this oops. Bell talked to this person on the phone, and the person told him details of the crime. Esquire culture editor Matt Miller told Inside Edition. Miller, who investigated the case for Esquire, said that the person who phoned Bell told him that he wanted a relationship with Beryl. As Bell and the person spoke, the person relayed details of the crime no one but the cops had. Bell gets this call and he goes to the police, and the police confirm that this was the actual killer because the person who talked to Bell had details that the police hadn't released yet. So they give Bell a police detail, and he soon gets another call from somebody else who had read his article, Miller said. That person told Bell that the killer was Paul Bateson, Miller said. It was the first time the name Paul Bateson had come up in a case. Now, who was Paul Bateson? It's just crazy. Paul Bateson was a well-respected technician at the NYU radiology lab. He worked there in the early to mid-70s. All of his colleagues loved him. They said he had a great bedside manner. They said that he was great with patients, that he was very skilled. The people that I talked to who worked with him said that he was just very reliable and great at his job. Bateson, along with a few of his colleagues, including Dr. Barton Lane, appeared in the 1973 horror classic, The Exorcist. He and his colleagues at NYU Radiology Department appeared in one of the film's most memorable and bloodiest scenes when doctors appear to insert a needle in Linda Blair's character, Reagan's neck. Okay, that I didn't know. So the people in it, except for the actors, were all professionals, Dr. Barton Lane told Inside Edition Digital. Paul was in it, of course, because he's the chief neurotechnologist. We were all dedicated to making it as a realistic scene as possible. We had no idea whether that scene was going to be used or not, and we had no idea really much about the movie. Lane was a longtime colleague of Bateson's. He was very good at what he did, Lane said. He knew more about the technology side of neurology than anybody, and that meant that he knew a lot of things that I needed to know. I learned a lot from him, he added. Lane and Bateson were friendly at work, Lane said. He had a really good personality, he said. He had a good sense of humor, but he was never flippant. He was always focused on what he was doing, which I respected because that's what you have to do. The two men didn't socialize, but we talked about things in common. We both liked the Metropolitan Opera and the New York City Opera, and we talked a bit about that. I would say he was calm and professional, in the best sense, Dr. Lane said. Not long after Bell received his tip, police arrested Bateson inside his Manhattan apartment. They find him drunk, Miller said. So this is him being taken into custody. When we got there, he indicated that they were there because of the Village Voice article. So he gets taken into custody and he gives the full same confession that he gave to Arthur Bell, Marlowe said. It's a very surreal it's a very surreal where the reporter becomes part of the news and the reporter's somehow involved. It's just so wild. It read to me like it was on a movie of its own. After his arrest, Bateson allegedly confessed to also being responsible for the bag murders, and during his trial in 1979 for the murder of Vera, the prosecutor said Bateson boasted to an acquittance that he was responsible for the death of the other men. Though those close to Bateson said he claimed responsibility for the killings of other men, the killings known as the bag murders remain unsolved and the victims remain unidentified. The bag murders and the killing of Vera were a stark reminder to those in the LGBTQ plus community, and they were not fully safe while going about their lives. This is before AIDS, but it's still a very little scary for gay men to go out and people pick up. They had to suss out based on some chit chat in a bar. The person they were dealing with was a psycho, must have said. Add to that the fact that there was a buzz about different bodies that had been popped up in the Hudson. Some of them were decapitated, dismembered, and died in a very grisly way that added to it jumped on me. That added to the fright level. Nobody was titillated or attracted by that. Bateson was sentenced to a 20 years life in 1979. He was released in August 2003. He died in 2012. Bateson was sentenced, sorry, Lane said he didn't find out about Bateson's crime until many years after it happened, but he was startled to hear the news. I think it's like many of us professional relationships. We may work with people every day, but you don't really know their inner self. And especially if you don't socialize with them, you don't know what their social life is like, he said. William Friedkin, who directed Bateson in The Exorcist, used Bateson's story as the inspiration for his controversial 1980 film, Cruising. Oh, yeah, that's another one. Cruising with Al Pacino as a cop who goes undercover to solve serial killings within the gay community. The film is based on a 1970 novel by New York Times reporter Gerald Walker. I still gotta watch that. Oh, no worries. Many in the LGBTQ plus community protested the film's production. Bell wrote in The Village Voice in 1979 that the movie promises to be the most oppressive, ugly, bigoted look at homosexuality ever presented on the screen. Bell also slammed Friedkin in another article for Village Voice. Had Friedkin dealt with gay groups, he'd have had an understanding of the insightful nature of the script. If he had a sense of social justice, perhaps he'd have alerted his script, which in effect says that the murder is the result of gay sex, he wrote. Cruising, the movie, did capture a certain scene, which is the macho posturing and the leather fetishism of that anvil mineshaft scene must have said. But I think what maybe the protests were partly responding to is the fact that there were not always victims, and Hollywood always shows gay people as victims. And yes, the murder cases that we're talking about turned out to prove that sometimes we are victims, but that's not the prevailing aspect of being a gay man. Friedkin did not respond to Inside Edition Digital's request for an interview. Here's the movie Al Pacino cruising. He's so young. 1980s, the birth of anti-violence project, AIDS epidemic, and the push to protect the community. With the end of the 70s came the LGBTQ plus community demand for more protection by its city authorities. I never feel there's enough to protect this queer community, I must have said. The cops, I know, they always have to wait for evidence to solve a crime. But I often feel that when it's a gay person who's killed, they're not rushing to solve it. I also think the media took a long time to come around to the fact that we deserve equal coverage, and it's consistent struggle. If you die of homophobia, then you then are crucified again after your death by homophobia and the lack of attention to your death. Author Ellen Green, who wrote the book Last Call, a true story of love, lust, and murder in queer New York, said that he too believes not enough was done to protect the community during this time. If there was, then the Anti-Violence Project wouldn't have to had to exist, he told Inside Edition. The New York Anti-Violence Project grew out of the Chelsea Gay Association as a way for LGBTQ plus New Yorkers to find havens of protection in the late 1970s. When AVP was formed, It formed in response to hate violence, and particularly hate violence that gay men were experiencing coming to and from gay bars in the Chelsea area. AVP Executive Director Beverly Tillery told Inside Edition. We started in 1980 and we started doing this work in response to violence that people in the community were experiencing that was really going without attention, Tillery said. Folks came together on their own to do two things. One was to support the survivors, and that it's still a very central part of our work today. Then the second thing that our founders did was they really came together to advocate for changes, and we also still do that today as well. Senator Duane, a founding member of AVP, said the organization was also a place where members of the community could receive tips to stay safe. That's awesome. I mean, at least stuff was being done to help protect these people. And of course, no help from the law. Like I said, they would help with the beatings of these gay people. When the anti-violence project really got going, that was one of the things that they really stressed to people was that in a bar, you decide to go home with a stranger to make sure you introduce them to someone, Senator Duane added. And if you're not there with a friend, introduce to the bartender someone just to make sure because not only so they can track you, but it's also a warning to the other person that it's going to be a little bit harder for them to get away with it now. A hotline was also created for people to use if they experience violence, Tillery said. The hotline, which still exists today, shined a light on how persuasive a problem violence against Claire. So the hotline still exists today, shined a light on how persuasive a problem violence against the LGBTQ plus community was. Violence within the community was also really an important part of the people were experiencing that needed to be addressed. After much public pressure, the NYPD began focusing on connecting with the LGBTQ plus community, and in 1992, the NYPD created the Gay Officers Action League, or it's called GOAL. More and more gay cops, male and female, started to be a little more comfortable. Same way, like in the 70s, there weren't a lot of women on the job. Mid 70s, they're starting to get women in. It took time. We were easily accepted. Now we weren't, but in time, we were. When they started to see we had the same goals, we had the same ambitions, retired NYPD Detective Donna told Inside Edition. At the same time, the AIDS epidemic was devastating the world over, but especially New York City and San Francisco. Well, yeah, because not only did they have HIV and AIDS, they also had a serial killer killing gays. The AIDS epidemic was raging through the community, and the community was facing a government that was basically not paying attention. Clearly did not care about what was happening, and so the community was getting together in a number of ways. The group ACT UP was founded, which Tillery said by the 1980s was in full force, where people were actively protesting, holding die-ins, demanding that the government pay attention to what was happening with the community. AIDS was stigmatized as a gay cancer and gay plague in the 1980s. Lack of knowledge and an already entrenched stigma surrounding the illness, even after more was learned, led many to make assumptions. Many believed only gay people could contract the disease. And that was their biggest fault for that, believing that. Joe Badass Joe. I like it. Yeah, if you change it. Oh my God, it takes 2 weeks to change back. That's funny though. I like that. My friend's son was a very slight man who was gay. He went downtown Halifax with some friends and he got such a bad his retina was detached and his eye socket was broken. Oh my that's what I'm saying. Like even today you're not safe. No one's safe from anything. When you're frustrated and you can't do anything about it, there seems to be an unfortunate human characteristic among some to look and blame someone. Just if you go back in history, it's always somebody's getting blamed. Dr. Anthony Fauci, director of the U.S. National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases, told Inside Edition in 2020 individuals who are people with HIV were not only suffering from their own disease, but they were stigmatized because of the perception. that they were in a risk group that got them infected. Like it was their fault that they got infected, which is completely ridiculous. The 1990s, the mystery and the misery of the last call killer. Like it was in the 70s and 80s, New York City in the 90s was in shambles. The late 80s, early 90s predated the cleanup of the city, Green said. There was a lot to clean up. I don't know how things compare to the way it was in the 70s, which sort of the golden age of the city being a mess. But just from what I gleaned from my research, on top of between 1 and 2,000 homicides a year in the early 90s, you were also dealing with, if not the peak of the AIDS epidemic, then certainly close to it. That was a toxic combination. During this time, a new serial killer was also targeting gay men at a piano bars like Townhouse and Five Oaks. Unlike the wild underground clubs of the 1970s, these watering holes brought in an older, more relaxed. There were 4 gay men that were murdered, at the very least. It was very scary. AIDS already was a terrifying plague that was affecting so many gay men. And now you have this man going to perfectly nice places, must have recalled. In May 1991, sanitation workers collecting trash along the busy New Jersey Turnpike found the dismembered remains of a one man left in several trash cans. Other evidence, like a blood-stained bedsheet and saw and bloody latex glove, were also found in the trash bins. Also in the trash was the victim's wallet, which police used to identify him as 54-year-old investment banker Peter Anderson from Philadelphia, who had been in Manhattan attending a political fundraiser when he disappeared. Reports say he had been separated from his wife, with whom he had 2 children, for a year after coming out as a gay man. He was last seen at the Townhouse Bar in Midtown on May 3rd. When it opened in 1989, the New York bar scene was just starting to get wonderfully crazy and just thumping and young and loud. The Townhouse was none of those things. It was like a calculated throwback, Green said. People always said that. That's one of the reasons why the Townhouse was attractive to people, because if you were seen going into it, nobody would think twice. Oh. Investigators in New York, New Jersey, and Pennsylvania went to work on solving the killing, which was a difficult case to investigate as it spanned 3 jurisdictions. Then in July 1992, the body of computer sales rep Thomas Mulchy, 57, was found in New Jersey Turnpike garbage cans. Like Anderson, a medical examiner determined he died from multiple stab wounds to the chest. Credit card transactions placed Mulcahy, who was in New York City to give a presentation at the World Trade Center, at the townhouse shortly before he disappeared. Court documents, as well as police, say his wife said he was known to have affairs with men. They had separated in 1990. In spring of 1993, less than a year after Mulchy's murder, 44-year-old Manhattan sex worker Anthony Marrow remains were found in trash cans in a rural part of New Jersey. 2 months later, remains were found in trash bags picked up from a rest stop in Rockland County, New York. They belonged to Michael Zakara, a 56-year-old gay man who worked for the New York Law Journal. Zakara had last been seen alive leaving a bar in Greenwich Village with a man he met there. These men were really found brutally, not just killed, they were brutally killed. Detective said, I can't think of any human being worth a hill of beans that wouldn't be upset after seeing and or reading about how these men were found. This guy was sick, so that alone should have the community know. Every cop I work with on that case, every single one wanted to get this son of a bitch, in plain English. The person behind the killings was dubbed the last call killer by the media. That's crazy. Yeah, I watched the whole season, Brittany. It was sad. That's why I'm doing it. I didn't even know anything of it. I knew some of it, but not like this. So I wanted to go over it and just discuss what actually happened, and that way we can determine what was truth from, fact from fiction. And but it's crazy how not only do they have to worry about, like I said, HIV and AIDS, they have to worry about a serial killer hunting gays as well. I know, I couldn't imagine it either. Hello. As the victims were mostly members of the LGBTQ plus community, there was an uproar that the authorities were not doing enough to solve the killings. And this is true because they weren't at all. The cases weren't always investigated to the degree that they should have been, Green claimed. It was a systemic societal bigotry. When it comes to the case in the early 70s, I think the jury just felt, well, this is a gay thing, so who cares? Then I think that the attitude certainly still existed in the 1990 trial too. If anything, by that point, the queer community was being blamed for AIDS, so why would they care if one gay man was assaulting another? That's disgusting. It sucks that it's true. But Malkintos noted that police in New York were at a disadvantage because it wasn't possible to prove the crimes had actually occurred within city limits. The community didn't understand. We can't just go to another jurisdiction and take over the case. If the community was looking at the police department like they did in the 70s, shame on them because we've come a long way, she said. Malkintos was put on NYPD task force, which aided authorities in New Jersey, New York's Rockland County, and Pennsylvania. I was actually flattered to be asked to work the case. I'd like to think it wasn't only because I'm gay, but because they thought I was a fairly good detective, she said. After 1993, the killings seemed to stop, but the families of some of the victims still had no answers as to what happened to their loved ones. No matter how long it's been since these men were murdered, it still hasn't been long enough that this has remotely made these family members whole. These murders might as well have happened yesterday, Green said. In 2001, a break in the last call killer case came after New Jersey State Police sent a fingerprint samples to the Toronto Police Department. Holy shit. In Canada too? No way. It's a fluke that he got caught because once the task force in 93 was over, a case like that goes to the bottom of the pile. This is not one of those situations where there's a team of detectives that are still working on it. Reality is not like that, Green said. Green said that because of the push and persistence from Margaret, the wife of the victim, Thomas, cops looked at it again. Detectives involved in the case from the New York Jersey utilized a new fingerprint technology that their counterparts at the Toronto Police Department had been using. Toronto Police Service was using a reasonably new technology called vacuum metal deposition. Because of the relationships the New Jersey police had with Canadian police, they were aware of this technology and called in a favor. The detectives sent fingerprints they were able to lift from the victims and sent them to Canada. Wow, I didn't know any of this. Toronto police were able to look to see what fingerprints matched from their massive database, and as luck would have it, they found a match from someone who was fingerprinted in Maine in 1973. The print matched to Richard Rogers, an openly gay nurse who had worked at a Manhattan hospital since the late 1970s. In May 2001, a decade after his first murder, Rogers was arrested inside his Staten Island home. When Richard Rogers was caught, there was a vast sense of relief. The whole community exhaled in illusion, must have said. I know people that actually were not going out or trying to get picked up until he was caught. And the years leading up to his arrest, Roger had run-ins with the law, but always seemed to avoid prison time. While a grad student studying French at the University of Maine in 1973, Rogers was arrested for the murder of one of his three roommates, Fred Spencer. For reasons that were not clear then and still are not clear, he took a roofing hammer and he beat one of his housemates, Spencer, to death. In Last Call, A True Story of Love, Lust, and Murder in Queer New York, Green wrote that Rogers wrapped Spencer's body in a tent, drove into the woods, and left it, but never called police because he was too afraid. So is this a movie? Oh, it's a book. Okay, well, here's a book if you guys are interested. A True Story of Love, Lust, and Murder in Queer New York, Last Call. Rogers was tried for murder and acquitted after he claimed he acted in self-defense. What? The reason his case is important is not just because ultimately the evidence from the case is what convicts Richard all those years later, but it's also important because the signs were all there in the way that he deliberately disposed of the body, Green told Inside Edition. And of course, from my perspective, it's important because Fred Spencer deserved to be more than just an afterthought. After his acquittal, Rogers went to nursing school at Pace University in New York City and was hired at Mount Sinai in 1979, where he worked until his arrest. Right about the nurse who was helping in the ER and she got AIDS after the blood went to her cuts her hands and had to start wearing gloves. Yeah, I think I heard of that too. Yeah, I've heard something like that. No, not at all. Yep. Yeah, oh, yeah. In August 1988, he was arrested after a 47-year-old Manhattan man filed a police report claiming that Rogers had drugged and attacked him the previous month, the New York Post reported. The man claimed that Rogers took him back to the Staten Island apartment, drugged him, tied him up to the bed, and beat him, then drove back to Manhattan? The hell? 4 months later, a judge in a non-jury trial acquitted Rogers of any wrongdoing. Wow. You want to know why? Because he's beating up gay men. That's why he got away with it. Killing and beating up gay men. Wow. What, Ash? Sound like a trumpet. Doodle-doo, doodle-doo. 4 months later, a judge in a non oh, I just read that. However, his good luck ran out when in November 2005, a New Jersey jury found Rogers, then 54, guilty for the murders of Thomas Mulcahy and Anthony Marrero. He was also found guilty of 2 counts of hindering his own apprehension and was sentenced to 30 years to life on each murder charge, with an additional 2.5 year sentence for each hindering apprehension charge. He also, or he is current. Uh, what happened? Sorry, my page jumped. Okay. Okay, so New Jersey jury found Rogers guilty. He's currently in a New Jersey state prison, serving a 65-year sentence. He will be eligible for parole on September 18th, 2066. Rogers was taunted as a teenager for being gay and didn't have the best relationship with his blue collar and would lash out for being teased or bullied about his sexuality. I don't care. That's not a good enough reason. Why would you kill, as they would say, your kind then? There's the cops raiding his apartment. The crimes of Richard Rogers and Paul Bateson are often not remembered to the degree that other high-profile crimes are, nor did they attract much attention from the media at the time or since. Richard Rogers' victims were so different, both in profession, ages, looks, that to write about all of them was, to some degree, to be able to write about a lot of gay experience in those years. Obviously, Richard being gay and the victims being queer, he was given more room to operate. I would say that there is less scrutiny because you have to have a member of a neglected community killing other members of that neglected community. It's almost a free pass. Tillery said the cases received little attention because of the existence of homophobia and transphobia in our society. Yeah, no shit. Today, crimes against the LGBTQ plus community continue. The Human Rights Campaign has recorded 24 killings of transgender or non-conforming citizens as of May 2021. In 2020, the organization recorded a record high number of violent fatal incidents against transgender and gender non-conforming people with 44 killings. The HRC said 2020 was the most violent year on record since the Human Rights Campaign began tracking these crimes in 2013. Holy shit. You would think there wouldn't be any of this anymore. You know what I mean? I mean, a few hateful people, but not murders. This is ridiculous. LGBTQ plus teens are still consistently at risk for harassment, bullying, and discrimination, and are far too often neglected and protected by the institution responsible for their care. I think the only thing to take away from Roger's killings is that the criminal justice system and the legal system have to be much better about dealing with whichever population happens to be most vulnerable at any given time, whether that means Black people, queer people, or this day and age, probably trans people, Green said. It's always shifting. There's always one group of people getting shafted. I would hope that would stop. Me too. The fight and struggle continues for the LGBTQ plus Americans and remain resilient in such a hostile environment. The queer community, I believe, is so extraordinarily resilient. We have been not only through AIDS, which is not over, by the way, we go through homophobia and queerphobia on a daily basis. We constantly have to prove our right to exist and have equal rights, even though we're consensual, responsible, tax-paying citizens, and there's always a fight. So we've gotten stronger and stronger. We've learned to bond tighter and tighter, must have said. And if people outside aren't going to fight for us, we're going to have to fight for ourselves. And we've also come to appreciate the allies that help us through these horrible crises. Then it says here, those in the New York LGBTQ plus community who feel threatened can contact the New York Anti-Violence Project. And there's a avp.org, and there's a 24-hour hotline. Wow. Mhm. Hey, Amanda. Yeah, but still, all these people being it's crazy. No, it doesn't surprise me either, Teresa. Yeah, there's always going to be crazy people in this world. I have a clip, well, a little bit more than a clip, sorry. So this I found, it's called The Killers Who Put New York's LGBTQ plus community in peril, and it is about um the bag murders and the last call killer.
This is the story of two criminals in a community that lived in peril. The crimes wreaked havoc among gay men in New York City,
last seen alive in a bar,
but were hardly recognized by the public. And some say even authorities.
Investigators say Richard Rogers would pick up gay men, then murder them.
This is the story of a community that lived in fear.
He very well may have more victims.
But soldier on to be who they are. And how two killers were eventually brought to justice. For Inside Edition Digital, I'm Sal Bono, and this is New York Gritty.
The 1970s was a sexual revolution for everybody, particularly gay men. This was after the 1969 Stonewall Rebellion, which defined the modern gay movement and sort of led to a lot more freedom and visibility. And it was before
Wow, did you read that? It said Homo Nest rated. Wow.
AIDS reared its ugly head in the early 80s. Sex was everywhere. For gay men, it was not only in bars, there was sex in trucks, sex on the pier. Sex was in the air, and people were certainly taking advantage of it.
You know, imagine if it's as bad as he's saying. Everywhere you go, these people are just sitting there banging wherever the hell they want. On the docks, here and there. Oh. Check my AG. All right.
In the late 1970s, one man committed a series of crimes that shocked New Yorkers in the gay community. Between 1975 and 1976, the dismembered bodies of 6 men turned up in the Hudson River. Cops believed all the men were gay. The bags that contained the remains reportedly had the insignia of NYU Medical Center's neuropsychiatric unit. The crimes became known as the bag murders.
These murders of LGBTQ people have just been kind of brushed aside for decades, and that there's dead ends and no evidence of any sort of attempt to bring justice for them.
Suspicion would eventually fall on a man named Paul Bateson.
Paul Bateson was a well-respected technician.
Now he's freaking creepy looking. Now the other guy, the Rogers guy, he doesn't look as bad. Actually, he looks like he could be somebody's neighbor, but this one.
At the NYU radiology lab. He worked there in the early into mid 70s. All of his colleagues loved him. They said he had a great bedside manner. They said that he was great with patients.
Bateson, along with his co-worker, Dr. Barton Lane, appeared in the classic 1973 film The Exorcist, in one of the movie's most memorable scenes.
Regan, I'm just going to move you down on the table, okay?
The people in it, except for the actors, were all professionals. Sabal was in it, of course, because he's the chief neurotechnologist. And we were all dedicated to making it as realistic a scene as possible. We had no idea whether the scene was going to be used or not. We had no idea really much about the movie.
That's just for a short time.
Well, I'm the one who gets to put the needle in her neck and say, don't move.
You're going to feel lipstick here. Don't move.
How did you know Paul Bateson?
So when you rotated through the radiology department, you worked with whoever the technologists assigned to you were. And although Paul wasn't the only neuroradiology technologist, but he's the one I remember the best because I learned a lot from him. He was very good at what he did. He knew more about technology side of neuroradiology than anybody. And that meant that he knew a lot of things that I needed to know. He had a good sense of humor, but he was never flippant. He was always focused on what he was doing, which I respected because that's what you sort of have to do. We didn't socialize, but we talked about things in common. We both liked the Metropolitan Opera and the New York City Opera, and we talked a bit about that. I would say he was calm and professional in the best sense.
In the mid-1970s, Bateson would reportedly frequent bars that were popular within the leather subculture, like the Anvil and Mine Shaft, which were after-hours clubs in downtown Manhattan. Many would keep secret that they attended such locations.
The Mine Shaft was part of a subculture within the community.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And it wasn't like, oh, what'd you do this weekend? He wouldn't have said to his coworker, I went to the Mine Shaft. You know, it was an after-hours club in the meat market, and it was not just leather, but it was like leather, you know, fetish kind of sex. And who doesn't have stuff? Like there, you could meet people who had the same stuff you had. Many people.
Holy crap. Now, this looks like, this is freaking wild. Oh my God.
Be probably drunk, which made them even easier to cause harm to. It's just scary even to think about it now.
This was before AIDS, but it still was a little scary for gay men to go out and pick people up. They had to kind of suss out based on some, chit chat in a bar if the person they were dealing with was psycho. Add to that the fact that there was buzz about different bodies that had been popped up in the Hudson. Some of them were decapitated and dismembered and died in a very grisly way. That added to the fright level.
On September 14th, 1977, a prominent reporter for Variety magazine named Addison Verrill was beaten and stabbed to death in his own apartment.
They went to a few bars. They were out late. They did a cocktail of drugs.
Yeah, and the guy got away with it.
And then they went.
Remember, this is the one where they said it was self-defense. Bullshit.
Back to Verrill's apartment where they had sex and did more drugs until the early hours of that morning. At first, the police thought that it was a robbery. And there wasn't much coverage of this murder at the time. But one Village Voice reporter, Arthur Bell, was one of the few, if not only, reporters reporting on these types of crimes. And he wrote about it and pointed out that it didn't look like a robbery because all of the valuable stuff in Verrill's apartment was still there.
As a gay person, the Village Voice was one of the ways that we would get any news at all, even if it was to, the personal ads part of the paper. I'm not sure they advertised gay bars, but certainly like maybe clubs and bands that cater to the gay community would be in there.
Arthur Bell was my predecessor at the Village Voice. I'm actually the person who replaced him after he passed. Arthur was a terrific gay activist, columnist. He wrote about showbiz, but he also wrote about more serious things like these murders. And it was a great move on the part of Arthur Bell to put in his column a plea for anyone who either did the murder or knew about it to reach him. And it actually did help lead to solving of the crime.
In the days after Verrill's slaying, police were looking for a suspect and wondered if it was tied to the so-called bag murders. But it was Arthur Bell and his tenacious journalism that gave authorities their biggest lead.
Shortly after he ran this article in the Village Voice where he was talking about the Addison Verrill murder, he got a call from an anonymous person claiming to have killed Addison Verrill. Bell talked to this person on the phone, and the person told him details of the crime. They told him that they didn't think that they were a psychopath, that they killed Verrill because they wanted some sort of relationship, that it was a crime of passion, essentially. Bell gets this call and he goes to the police, and the police confirmed that this was the actual killer because the person who talked to Bell had details that the police hadn't released. They give Bell a police detail, and he soon gets another call from somebody who had read his article that
Holy crap. So this whole this video I'm showing is literally repeating every single thing that I just read. I like that though. At least I know that it's all true. Yeah, Paul Bateson.
That the killer was Paul Bateson. The police go to Paul Bateson's apartment where they find him drunk, and according to police documents that I obtained, when they got there, he indicated that he were there because of the Village Voice article. He gets taken into custody, and he gives the full same confession that he gave to Arthur Bell.
This one does scare me. I don't know. Yeah. I could see him being the killer, but the other guy, hopefully they show him. He doesn't.
That's where his arrest and everything begins, with this just wild story of him calling a reporter and confessing, and the reporter writing about the confession, and the reporter becomes part of the news, and the reporter is somehow involved, and it's just so wild. And it's read to me like it was a movie on its own.
After his arrest, Bateson allegedly confessed to the bag murders. However, no evidence ever proved his confession. Even during his trial in 1979 for the murder of Addison Verrill, the prosecutor said Bateson boasted to an acquaintance that he was responsible for the deaths of the other men. Bateson was sentenced to 20 years to life in 1979, but only for the murder of Verrill. He was released in August 2003. He passed away in 2012.
It was quite a shocking revelation. I think it's like many of us in professional relationships. We may work with people every day, but you don't really know their inner self, and especially if you don't socialize them, you don't know what their social life is like. Maybe I'm an incurious person that way, because I don't usually go into that with someone unless they want to volunteer it. You do your job, and then you go home and you have your life, and they have theirs.
Filmmaker William Friedkin, who directed Bateson in The Exorcist, used the killer's story as the inspiration behind his controversial 1980 film, Cruising.
How'd you like to disappear?
Disappear?
Go undercover.
So that's crazy. So the actual real doctors and stuff that worked on the exorcism, one of them was a serial killer. That's insane.
Cruising, which starred Al Pacino, is about a cop who goes undercover to solve serial killings within the gay community.
What he discovers will change his life forever.
Many in the LGBTQ community protested the film's production across New York City, including Village Voice journalist Arthur Bell, who wrote in 1979 that the movie is, quote, the most oppressive, ugly, bigoted look at homosexuality ever presented on screen. Bell also slammed Friedkin and told those reading his column to give the production hell. He added that if the filmmaker, quote, dealt with gay groups, he'd have an understanding of the insightful nature of his script. If he had any sense of social justice, perhaps he'd have altered his script, which, in effect, says that murder is a result of gay sex.
The movie did capture a certain scene, which was kind of the macho posturing and the leather fetishism of that anvil mineshaft scene. But I think what maybe the protests were partly responding to is the fact that we're not always victims, and Hollywood always shows gay people as victims. And yes, the murder cases that we're talking about turn out to prove that sometimes we are victims, but that's not the prevailing aspect of being a gay man.
Friedkin has claimed many times over the years that Bateson admitted to him that he was responsible for the bag murders. Yet, no proof of that claim exists. Bateson's story also appeared in season 2 of Netflix's acclaimed series, Mindhunter, when detectives interviewed the Bateson character, played by actor Morgan Kelly, about the bag murders.
6 leather men dumped in the Hudson in garbage bags. Do you think that the person who killed those men could have been experimenting?
The bag murders remain unsolved to this day, and the bodies are still considered John Doe's by authorities.
By the end of the 1970s, the LGBTQ
that bugs
community...
me. We're now in 2023, and yet they don't know any of these victims, all 9 or 6 of them. They don't know who they are, nothing. That's crazy to me.
Demanded more protection by the city and authorities.
I never feel there's enough to protect this queer community. The cops, I know they always have to wait for evidence to solve a crime, but I often feel that when it's a gay person who's killed, they're not rushing to solve it.
What?
I also think the media took a long time to come around to the fact that we deserve equal coverage. It's a constant struggle. If you die of homophobia, you then are crucified again after your death by homophobia and the lack of attention to your death.
Do you feel that there was enough to protect the community at the time?
No. If there was, then the Anti-Violence Project wouldn't have had to exist.
Organizations like the New York Anti-Violence Project emerged to help bring attention to crimes against the LGBTQ community.
The Anti-Violence Project, or AVP, is an organization that works to address and end all forms of violence that impact the LGBTQ community, lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender community. And we started in 1980, and we started doing this work in response to violence that people in the community were experiencing that was really going without attention. And so folks came together on their own to do two things. One, to support the survivors, and that is still a very central part of our work today. And then the second thing that our founders did was they really came together to advocate for changes.
They would talk about how you never go off with someone without introducing them to your friend and talking about where, you know what I mean? So that if you were missing the next day, there was like sort of a buddy system so that you could track down what happened.
In the early 90s, New York's LGBTQ community faced a familiar terror. A serial killer was targeting gay men at specific piano bars.
Yes, they believe he very well may have more victims.
There were 4 gay men that were murdered at the very least.
You really don't know people. He was watching that filth on his work computer. I'm glad they got him too, but you could have knocked me down with a feather. Wow. Yeah, you just don't know people. That's insane. Glad they got him.
It was very scary. I mean, AIDS already was a terrifying plague that was affecting so many gay men. And now you had this man going to perfectly nice places like Five Oaks, which is a piano bar, Townhouse, which was at the time kind of a hustler bar. Half the people were sex workers, the other half were old men. But it was a lovely townhouse with flowers, and it almost looked like the waiting room to a funeral home, which actually proved prophetic in a very tragic way.
In 1991, sanitation workers collecting trash along the busy New Jersey Turnpike found the dismembered remains of one man across various trash cans, as well as other evidence like a blood-stained bedsheet, a saw, and bloody latex gloves. Cops say the victim's wallet was found in the trash. He was identified as 54-year-old investment banker Peter Anderson from Philadelphia, who was in Manhattan attending a political fundraiser. Reports say he had been separated from his wife for a year, with whom he had 2 children, after coming out as a gay man. He was last seen at the Townhouse Bar in Midtown.
When it opened in 1989, the New York bar scene was just starting to get wonderfully crazy, thumping and young and loud. And the Townhouse was none of those things. It was like a calculated throwback. Not only was it a piano bar, but it was a piano bar that just seemed really old, even on the day it opened. And that's who it attracted. It attracted older men and also attracted hustlers who were interested in older men, and vice versa.
More than a year later, in July 1992, the body of 57-year-old computer sales rep Thomas Mulcahy was also found in New Jersey Turnpike garbage cans, just like Peter Anderson.
That's sick.
Mulcahy, a father of 4 from Massachusetts, was in New York.
Like these people were fathers. They were married. They had wives. Well, the one guy before him just came out as being gay. But they're fathers. They're people. They have moms. They've got siblings. They've got wives, or they don't have wives. They've got partners. They've got children. I mean, just sick.
City to give a presentation at the World Trade Center. Court documents, as well as police, say his wife said he was known to have affairs with men.
Mulcahy, a computer executive from Boston, was known to frequent gay bars in Manhattan.
Credit card transactions placed Mulcahy here at the Townhouse shortly before he disappeared.
Shit, so that Townhouse is still up and running?
That's why the Townhouse was attractive to people, because if you were seen going into it, nobody would think twice.
I'm gonna go there.
In the spring of 1993, less than a year after Mulcahy's murder, 44-year-old Anthony Marrero, a sex worker who hustled in Manhattan, went missing. Days later, his body parts were found in a rural part of New Jersey in trash cans. Months later, in late July, body parts were found in trash cans picked up from a rest stop in Rockland County, New York. They belonged to Michael Sakara, a 56-year-old gay man who worked for the New York Law Journal. Sakara had been last seen alive leaving a bar in Greenwich Village with a man that he met there. The perp was dubbed the last call killer by the media because of his MO of picking up men as a bar was closing.
I remember the last call killer case. They blamed New York City for not getting involved. And it was very difficult for them to understand that none of the bodies recovered were recovered in New York City.
While the victims were all found in different locations outside Manhattan,
three jurisdictions that was all over.
Cases that we do have are extremely similar. I mean, they're extremely similar in some of the earmarks of the crime.
Public outcry from the LGBTQ community demanded to know what was going on.
I remember the community being up in arms because the police department wasn't doing anything. And I remember taking it personal because none of the cases, although the men may have been last seen in Manhattan or parts of New York, none of the crime, at least we couldn't prove or have knowledge of, occurred within the city limits. So the community didn't understand, we can't just go to another jurisdiction and take over the case. The second thing is, I was actually
The thing is, though, the police were aware of this in all three jurisdictions. There is something they could have done. Like, come on. They just didn't want to. They didn't want to be bothered.
flattered to be asked to work the case. I'd like to think it wasn't only because I'm gay, but because they thought I was a fairly good detective.
What was it like working with all sorts of law enforcement teams and trying to catch the last call killer?
When we got involved, I think I went to New Jersey a couple of times, but basically the main hub, so to speak, was in New City, Rockland County, where the DA's office, the detectives there pretty much pulled everything together, which made sense because that was where the last body was found. I felt that we were welcomed.
After 1993, the killings ceased, but the families of some of the victims still had no answers as to what happened to their loved ones. In 2001, a break in the case came after New Jersey State Police sent fingerprint samples to the Toronto Police Department.
Once the
Yeah, that Josh Duggar is one sick mother effer. Oh my God. Like, really? He should never be allowed out. Ever, 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 ever. This whole 12 years bullshit. No.
task force in 1993 was over, a case like that goes to the bottom of the pile. This is not one of those situations where there's a team of detectives that are still working.
Yeah, me too, Teresa.
The reason that they looked at it again is because Margaret Mulcahy, the wife of the second victim, was persistent and pushed them to do it. And also around that time, the Toronto Police Service was using a reasonably new technology called vacuum metal deposition. And because of relationships that the New Jersey police had with the Canadian police, they were aware of this technology and called in a favor.
The Toronto PD was using cutting-edge technology that lifted multiple matching prints. They linked them to a man named Richard Rogers.
Yeah, look
Had
at
they
this
not done
guy.
that, and then had the
Look at him. He does not look like what? He is no way, no how. He does not look like a murderer whatsoever. He looks like your average married man. Now the other guy, he scares the crap out of me just looking at him. But him, no.
the original fingerprint from Maine in 1973 been pristine, he still wouldn't have been caught.
Police found Rogers' fingerprints connected to another murder. In 1973, Rogers was tried for the murder of his roommate while he was a grad student in Maine.
He lived in a house with 3 other men, and one day, for reasons that weren't clear then and still are not clear, he took a roofing hammer and he beat one of his housemates to death.
Yeah, and got away
It
with
was
it.
Fred Spencer.
New Jersey detectives followed Richard Rogers' fingerprints to Maine to find that he had been tried and acquitted for the 1973 murder of a fellow student at the University of Maine.
It's a fluke that he got caught because a case could be made that the reason this case was solved is because whoever took Richard Rogers' fingerprint at the county jail in 1973 did a great job. If there had been any smudges on that print, if there had been too much ink or not enough ink, then the rest of it wouldn't have mattered. Richard Rogers was a pediatric nurse at Mount Sinai Hospital, and he had worked at the hospital since the late 1970s. He mainly worked with infants who had had cardiac surgery. And he was a gay man who lived in Staten Island, and he had his dark side. The reason his case is important is not just because ultimately the evidence from that case is what convicts Richard all those years later, but it's also important because the signs were all there in the way that he deliberately disposed of the body.
Investigators say Richard Rogers would
He got away with other things as well. Beating the shit out of people. Clearly this man's heart is filled with hate. He doesn't like gay men, even though he's gay. I don't know. For me, there's a lot of warning signs, but I'm not a cop. And I know that things take time, but I honestly believe that because he was killing gay men, they didn't give a shit at
coldly
all.
and efficiently chop up their body parts before dumping them along various highways and other places.
And of course, from my perspective, it's important because Fred Spencer deserved to be more than just an afterthought.
When Richard Rogers was caught, there was a vast sense of relief. The whole community kind of exhaled in unison. I know people that actually were not going out or trying to get picked up until he was caught.
In 2005, a New Jersey jury found
Now
Rogers
he looks
guilty
like
for
a
the
killer.
murders of Thomas Mulcahy and Anthony Marrero. He was also found guilty of 2 counts of hindering his own apprehension and was sentenced to 30 years to life on each murder charge, with additional 2.5 years for each hindering apprehension charge. He is currently in a New Jersey state prison serving a 65-year sentence.
Yeah, here's me.
Elon Green
He doesn't get
profiled
out until
victims in his acclaimed
2066.
book, Last Call, a true story of love, lust, and murder in queer
I want to
New
read
York.
that book.
I just want readers to know about them as people beyond their obituaries. It's not as if these people were extraordinary any more than any of us are extraordinary. They were just trying to live their lives and live it as honestly as they could. And I want readers to understand the lengths that they went to do that. Richard being gay and the victims being queer, he was given more room to operate. I would say there was less scrutiny. You have a member of a neglected community killing other members of that neglected community. It's almost a
Yeah, so in the police's, like, their eyes, it's a win. You know what I mean? Yeah, like he says, it's almost free pass.
To this day, police still get grief for the length it took to capture Rogers, compounded with the crimes the LGBTQ community has faced and continues to face.
Good.
These men were really found brutally, not just killed, they were brutally killed. As much as I say you need to separate your emotions from your job, I can't think of any human being worth a hill of beans that wouldn't be upset after seeing and or reading about how these men were found. This guy was a sick so-and-so. So that alone should have the community know. Every cop I work with on that case, every single one wanted to get this son of a bitch in plain English.
The crimes of Richard Rogers, like that of Paul Bateson, are often not remembered like other high-profile crimes of their respective eras, and didn't garner that.
Yeah, of course they won't be remembered because it had to do with gay men. That's my assumption. I'm gonna see what he says though.
That much media attention.
Why don't the atrocities that occur against people in the LGBTQ community get as much recognition as their straight cis counterparts?
I mean, one easy way to answer that is to say, of course, it's because of the existence of homophobia and transphobia in our society.
I think the only thing to take away from it is that the criminal justice system and the legal system have to be much better about dealing with whichever population happens
Oh
to
my
be
God,
most
yeah,
vulnerable at any
Bundy.
given time. Whether that means Black people, queer people, or this day and age, probably trans people. And it's always shifting. There's always one group of people getting shafted. And I would hope that that would stop.
In the years after the Stonewall riots, some gay New Yorkers lived loud and proud, while others were still afraid to come out and be themselves as they feared stigma, ridicule, or exile. Havens across the city, like bars, nightclubs, or cafes, allowed
Yeah,
gay New
that's
Yorkers to be their
funny.
true
Oh my
selves.
God.
But violent
Hey,
homophobia
Shelly.
against the LGBTQ community was also rampant.
So gay men on their way to the gay bars with like teenagers were beating them up. If you didn't know better, if you walked down certain streets, you were in danger.
When AVP was formed, it formed in response to hate violence, and particularly hate violence that gay men were experiencing coming to and from gay bars. The bars obviously were a clear target for the LGBT community. And so people started figuring out, sort of how to kind of create their own safety. Pairing up.
Like, this is an issue, absolutely. Another issue is just people in general who have I don't know, I guess like burn victims, who have disabilities, who have like autism and stuff like that. They're targets for bullying big time. It's gotta stop. It really does.
Up. Our hotline was created at this time where people were just letting each other know, look, reach out if you've experienced any kind of violence.
Yeah, exactly.
As they started to respond to hate violence and people started to call this hotline, they were hearing more and more also from folks who were talking about intimate partner violence.
That was one of the things that they really stressed to people was that in a bar, you decide to go home with a stranger, you're going to bring a stranger home, make sure you introduce him, right? And if you're not there with a friend, to the bartender.
Before he leaves a bar with this man that he picks up there, he does something that the Gay and Lesbian Anti-Violence Project had been advising gay men to do, and that is to introduce this companion to others before you leave a bar with him.
That's such a good
He introduces
idea.
this man to his friends at the bar as a nurse, and that becomes a key clue.
Through public pressure, the NYPD began their community outreach.
The police department in the 70s is a lot different than how they evolved in the 80s, 90s, and present. In 1982, they came up with GOLD, Gay Officers Action League, and more gay cops, male and female, started to be a little more comfortable. We easily accepted? No, we weren't. But in time we were. When they started to see we had the same goals, we had the same ambitions, we're here to do a job.
I feel like giving her a hug.
So if the community was looking at the police department like they did in the 70s, shame on them because we've come a long way. to me, not only being a gay female, but just I thought NYPD was the best job in the world.
Ultimately, the LGBTQ community had to advocate for itself in the face of harassment, homophobia, and the AIDS pandemic.
The AIDS epidemic was raging through the community, and the community was facing a government that was basically not paying attention, clearly did not care about what was happening. And so the community was getting together in a number of ways. You know, some people might remember ACT UP was in full force. People were actively protesting, holding die-ins, demanding that the government pay attention to what was happening with the community. So there was a lot going on. The community was vibrant, it was active. People were politically engaged and socially engaged.
The queer
Every
community,
time I
I
see
believe,
that
is
flag,
so
all I think about is KJ and her bullshit. Because she told everyone that it was a fucking hate crime, when in actuality, it was the wind. And it's people like that that pretend that they are gay and they stand for LGBTQ plus communities, which is a lie, and they just make me sick. But that every time I see a flag now, I think of her bullshit, and I shouldn't have to. I should think, smile and be like, "Yay, more people are coming around." Shouldn't be thinking of that
extraordinarily
idiot.
resilient. I mean, we have been not only through AIDS, which is not over, by
Yes,
the way.
and
We
true
go
serial
through
killers.
homophobia and queerphobia on a daily basis. We constantly have to prove our right to exist and to have equal rights, even though we're consensual, responsible, tax-paying citizens. And there's always a fight. We've gotten stronger and stronger. We've learned to bond tighter and tighter. And if people outside aren't going to fight for us, we're going to have to fight for ourselves. And we've also
With
come to
eyelashes
appreciate
in the
the allies
background.
that help us through these horrible crises.
If you or a loved one in the LGBTQ plus community feels threatened, please visit the New York Anti-Violence Project, and you can either call them too. Always been to hate others for reasons other than just understand we have our own versions. I just don't follow that. Yeah, I agree. Yeah, and see, when they do that, it's like, really? Yeah, I know, I get it's like you can't win or lose, right? You're working on the script? Okay. Yeah. I'm not bisexual. I'm as straight as I can. But I believe that everyone has a right to live and everyone has a right to express themselves. Like, this is just ridiculous. Now in 2023. Now, back then, I would probably be singing a different tune because that's what we were all taught. Gay's bad. Gay brings AIDS. Gay brings HIV. You know what I mean? Now it's like, I want my gay best friend. So you're amazing. You do not like tacos, you like hot. Alrighty, I should get off here. I can't believe it's been 2 hours, but I enjoyed having you guys here. I don't even know if tomorrow's gonna be a school day or not, but I gotta go shopping. You like sausages? I just don't wanna be touched. I wanna be left the fuck alone. I like being a nun. Yeah, I can agree with you with that too. But soft tacos are good. All right, you little piglets. You have a good night. I hope you enjoyed this, and I'll be back tomorrow with Great Dane Mom. She'll be on panel with me. We're going to be doing the Myrtle's Plantation. Now I've also got the episode on Unsolved Mysteries, so we can watch it too. All right, you guys have a good night. Bye.